Hello everyone, in today's video we're going to be showing you the relationship between radar and traditional surveillance, as in photo, infrared, or even visual, and kind of how they interplay with each other so that you can kind of understand what sort of information you can gain from each, as well as kind of how best to employ them. So let's get started. So our scenario today has a relatively straightforward setup. Way down here in Panama, we have ourselves a bunch of different targets, of which several of them auto-detectable. You can actually see usually the auto-detectable targets are things like buildings and structures. We have a couple of different piers down here that we know exist, but we have no idea what's on them. We're also picking a bunch of unknown targets, including whatever this is right here. Some kind of civilian. Of course, you're sitting there going, how do you know it's some kind of civilian? Because if we pop up to the contact report, you can see that it has a generic navigation radar, along with all of these items down here. So unfortunately, that's not terribly helpful for us. We also know there's some kind of radar up here. It's a mobile vehicle of some kind. We're getting the Watchman signal off of it. We can actually pop up here real quickly and take a look at this. And I think it's pretty safe to say it's a Watchman radar. Now, one of the things that our good friend Dangerous Waters had years ago is the ability to manually identify a target. Like if you can kind of intuit what it is, you can actually sit here, right click and say change to whatever. But unfortunately, we don't have that capability here. So we're going to have to kind of work with what we have. So the first type of surveillance we're going to be doing here is purely radar surveillance. Now, one thing you have to know about radar surveillance is there's different types of radars with different wavelengths, with different styles. So you might be able to get some information from some radars, but you might not get them from other radars. And it gets relatively straightforward, as you'll see in just a few minutes. So the aircraft I'm going to use this for, as far as my little demonstration here, of course, is going to be the E-2D. Now, the E-2D is a really, really impressive AWACS airplane. The radar sticking off the top of this, if I actually grab it real quick, is the AN/APY number 9. The cool thing you need to know about this is two things. First of all, you'll observe that it has some amazing capabilities. It has the ability to identify friend or foe. It can classify items, which is really fascinating. You have NCTR, so you can actually identify a particular type of aircraft by its engines. It's a pulse Doppler, of course, is actively scanned. These are wonderful, wonderful tools that give us a lot of information about the target. But of course, if we run off and grab this one right away, we're almost cheating a little. So we might as well grab something a little bit older. So to do that, of course, I'm going to go ahead and grab myself an F1 here. I'm going to press some insert action. We're going to get ourselves something a little more traditional. We're going to get an E2A, which is going to be a little bit older. E2, helps if you type it correctly. It's E-2C would be the old one. So we're going to grab one of these real quickly here. This is going to be the old school one. This one does not have the same quality radar here. If you actually hit this one on here, you'll see here we're the APS-139, which is a little bit older technology, and it doesn't have a lot of this fun stuff. So let's go ahead and flip that sucker on real quickly, and let's see what we can find out about the target region. Keep in mind, we are in range here. If I zoom out a bit, you can see this. So immediately, we get a bunch of unclear contacts, and give it a few moments here. The radar operators in the back of this airplane right now are looking at this going, there's a lot of dots, and I think they're helicopters. Okay, this is giving us some information here. And honestly, it's kind of spaghetti. And there's a bunch of helicopters in there being all irritating there. And of course, this is the radar operator attempting to interpret. We, as the player here, never get to see the raw radar data. And I know some of you out there are like, can we do that? And I'm like, there's games for that. Go play those. But the cool thing here is we know that there are some targets down here. That's about as much information as we're going to be able to get with this particular generation of radar. It's not bad data per se, but it's certainly worthless from a targeting perspective. I certainly couldn't hit any of these things with the current data that I'm collecting. I know it's there, and like I said, I can see a couple skunks down here. I know there's an airfield here, but I have no idea what's at the airfield. I've got a couple buildings. I also know there's that watchtower. So let's grab this guy and move him a little closer. And of course, when you close the range here, it's going to improve things a little bit first, but not nearly as much as you really want it to do. One thing you notice, of course, by the way, here is we have some weather today. We have these moderate middle clouds, which are going to limit us. But radars can see through clouds generally, so we'll have a pretty good time of it. But as you can see, even when we close the range to about 30 nautical miles, there's just a bunch of helicopters, and I'm pretty confident there's a civilian boat somewhere in here, and I'm pretty confident there's something else here. If we go to the contact report, I got nothing. I'm not getting a lot of data from this generation of radar. So generally what we have now is a bit of a puzzle. We know that there's something there. We know roughly what it is, but we don't know much more about it. So at this point, of course, we can up our game a little bit by bringing in a better, more dedicated reconnaissance unit. So one of the things I need to bring up about reconnaissance units in general is if you actually... Wait, what? Oh, okay, I get you. So one of the things you need to know here, and this is really important, is that when I open up anything that's a visual reconnaissance unit, hey, they put a circle on it for me. You will notice it has a maximum range, which is how far it can see something, and it has a I can see you range. The difference between these two is if I know something is there, I can see it at 50 miles. If I don't know something is there, I can only see it at 5 nautical miles. That makes it rather challenging for us to be able to get close enough to actually identify things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave the radar of our Hawkeye on here. I'm going to grab the Viggen and I'm going to order him to do basically a low altitude pass. We have to get underneath that cloud layer here. So I'm going to go and unpause and kind of get him going. This is what the Viggens are good for. Viggen's going to come scooting right over the water. He's about to dive right through the cloud layer. Gets all sorts of bouncy turbulence there as he busts through. Now, as I was mentioning, remember, his little visual pod here only has a 15-mile range. So I won't even be able to start seeing things until I get to about this point. If I wanted to, I could actually grab the leg. So we have a pretty good idea of where he's actually going to be able to start seeing things. Now, remember, his sensor is being cued by our friend the Hawkeye here. So we're going to let him go ahead and take his high-speed pass here. Give it a few moments. He's getting a little bit closer here. We can definitely pretty confident about some of the pause. You will notice as soon as we come to range, we have some new things. One of the things you'll notice here is our little civilian has finally been identified as a commercial tugboat. And if you actually go over here, you can see all the different things that are looking at him right now. And of course, when we go to it, we can see the fact that these are all possible matches based on this. You can also see here that our camera mounted onto our lovely little Viggen did some good work here, which is awesome. The other thing we notice is we have otro barco de avión down here, which of course, I think you can guess which one that is. One of the things we know about is it's just sort of chilling there. We're actually still missing a bunch of units. Coming down here by the piers, again, those are all kind of chaotic little aircraft zipping around. Now, as we get closer, our aircraft is going to have an easier time of identifying some of the stuff down there. And again, this is just pure visual right now being assisted by radar. If we're going pure visual, which we'll do in a minute, this gets a little more challenging. So he's going to go ahead and make his pass. Again, he's going sideways here like a good Cyborn. And we've identified a couple new things. One thing we've identified is that there's these two large piers, and we see that there are certain structures on it. I want to zoom in here. You'll notice I got some small ships. That's about the best I'm able to detect at that distance using photography here. Again, I'm amazed we can develop the photography that quickly, but it's part of the fun, I guess. We also know that over at the airbase, we're pretty sure there's something there, but we can't actually identify it or even be able to recognize it directly. Now, as you can see, with a little bit of radar help, we can get a slightly better picture of what's going on. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to reset my scenario real quickly here. I'm going to grab my blue side, as always. I'm going to grab that Viggen again, but this time I'm not going to give him the aid of having queuing from our good friend, the radar ship here. So I'm going to go ahead and unpause. I'm going to let him go ahead and sneak in here. I'm going to let him get a little bit closer here before we order him to drop down to 2 grand. All right, we'll go ahead and give that order to 2,000 feet. We've got to get under that cloud layer. And he drops down nice and low. Now remember, there is no assistance to this aircraft from those radars to cue where his sensors should be facing. So everything he's doing right now is purely what he can see looking out the window. Now the cool thing here is that doesn't mean he's useless. And as a matter of fact, the otro barco de avión gets picked up right away here by the long lens of this camera. You can actually see here that, having that little handy dandy, the camera recon pod, it has a 20 nautical mile fine stuff range, 12 mile fine stuff range, 20 nautical mile if you can tell me where it is range, which is great. So we're able to identify very quickly the fact that there is a aircraft carrier there. I'll go ahead and do one of these real fast. That was about 10 nautical miles away where we identified it, which is less than 12, so that checks out. So our handy-dandy airplane here, again, Viggen's a great airplane for this particular purpose, and he's just going to go ahead and do his quick little pass over the bay here, and we identify the fact that there are definitely some port structures here. We can identify probably, if I click on one real fast, if I do a contact report, I can see clearly that apparently one has a PPK, it has a cannon on it, which is pretty cool. There's a little commercial tugboat, again, kind of doing his thing. And he comes ripping by and doing the best he can, kind of spotting things. And again, visual alone, we're kind of limited here. We're missing a lot of details. And the other thing we're missing too is all of these helicopters, but we're going to ignore that part for just a second here. So it's not great. Now, another kind of cool quirk about this aircraft, and this is true with many reconnaissance aircraft, depending on what area you're dealing with, of course, is the fact a lot of them have surface search radars. Now, the advantage to that, of course, is if I make him go take a turn real quickly, I can flip on his own radar. Now, what's going to happen is we're now going to be using the radar to find the thing, and we're going to cue the sensor, the camera, to be able to identify the item. So I'll let him come swing around here. We'll get a really good view of the whole area. And many things suddenly just appeared now that we're combining the visual as well as the radar recce here. When I come over to, let's say, Enrique Adolfo Jimenez Airport, If I go to a contact report, I'll actually identify several aircraft that are located there. Likewise, I'm actually able to spot these helicopters because, again, we've got the radar, which now means we can cue the cameras, as weird as that sounds. Swinging down here, I've got a couple ports. Let's see if we get a little bit better information here. So we have a bunch of Grishas all kind of queued up there. And of course, I know the Otro Barco de Avión is down here as well. So it gives us the ability to kind of see that as we kind of zip by here. Kind of make one more quick pass with the radar, see if he can identify anything else. And again, he needs to get close enough to be able to visually identify. And this is an older aircraft. There's not a lot of fanciness going on here. This is just for the purposes of kind of showing you off. We're missing all of our ground units, by the way, here. And of course, we can identify most of this stuff here, and that's kind of an upside, a downside. But the good thing is we're able to at least identify more because we're using the radar. I'm going to go ahead and send the Vigan back home here. He's going to go head out right now. Keep in mind, by the way, it is 4:45 in the morning. If it was a little bit later in the day and there's a little bit more sunshine, these cameras would give you much, much better range. But for this purpose here, I did that intentionally just to give you an idea of how challenging this can be. So, of course, technology moves on, and some technology is actually very sophisticated, and especially once we enter into the world of phased array radars. Now, the E2D here that we took a look at for a moment there earlier has a really, really powerful radar on board. It's AN/APY9. It's got a lot of stuff. The first thing you'll notice here is it's got all of these lovely tools that we saw earlier. And when we flip this sucker on, watch what kind of information I can collect. I'm actually going to come down here and drop all those contacts just for the purpose. Actually, we're going to grab him, get him out of here, because otherwise he's not going to let me demonstrate my point here. Why are we able to identify this one still? I don't know. Nobody's detecting. That's fine. So I'm going to go ahead and take my Hawkeye. Actually, I'll do it even more carefully here. I'll reset the scenario just in case. I'll put this one back to blue side, grab this one, zoom out just a bit. I'm going to grab that Hawkeye. I'm going to move him right about here. I'm going to go ahead and flip on his radar. Now, this is a very, very, very powerful, very modern radar. And I'm going to flip that sucker on real quick, and immediately you can see how much better the phased array radar is at detection. First things first, we identified these two ships immediately. Not identified, we've spotted them. We have to still be able to get a little bit more time and a little more data to be actually tell you. But not only can we do that, but you'll notice here that this ship here is actually identified as carrying small aircrafts. The radar is so precise that not only do you know that we're dealing with a aircraft carrying ship, but we also can identify how many aircraft are on the deck of that ship. And again, this is a pretty serious piece of technology here. We're not getting anything fancy as far as that goes. So I'm going to let him do his little donut here and see what else we can identify. And again, without that visual detection, it's going to be very challenging to identify certain ships. It's going to be difficult to identify the name of the ship unless he turns a radar on or something like that. And you can see we've also lost information about where all those other items are. Now, of course, the technology moves on again, and we're concentrating on kind of both here so you can get an idea of just how effective some of these units are. And there's this guy right here. For those of you not familiar with the J-Stars, think of a J-Stars as like when you play strategy games and you have that top-down view where you can see everything. That's literally what this is. So I'm going to go ahead and send this guy home. I'm going to take this guy. I'm going to get him a little bit closer. I'm going to have him do a single pass. Now, the J-Stars is unique. The radar on board of this thing is ridiculous. When I say ridiculous, I can't describe to you how powerful this radar is. It's staggeringly effective, and you'll see exactly what I mean once we flip this thing on. So just in a few seconds here, I'm just going to let this radar. It's the only thing running, by the way. It makes one pass. Watch this. Pass is being spun around here. Keep in mind we have some distance. I've identified the radar, and we're done. Pause. You'll notice at this distance, I've identified my first ground unit, something we didn't pick up at all so far. We've also identified the carrier, spotted the carrier. We haven't actually identified it yet. Now watch what happens as my J-Stars makes a pass by here. And again, he's just kind of doing his thing here. He's not really lined up right now, so I'm going to give him a moment to go ahead and turn. Now watch this. All right, let's pause. Remember, this is radar through a cloud. The first things first is you'll notice we finally identified the mooring buoys. They've been here this entire time, but we haven't been able to identify them at all. We have very, very large mooring buoys here. And of course, if we actually do a contact report, we can actually spot the fact that these things have cruisers connected to them. The other thing you'll note here is if I click on the carrier here, I can actually tell you what type of aircraft, actually they're small aircraft that are on the deck of this particular carrier. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to let my J-Stars kind of zip by real fast here. and just kind of do his thing here. Again, these radars work best when they're at a 90-degree angle to the thing they're looking at. In the real world, it might be a little bit different inside the sim, obviously. But he makes his pass, and again, you'd never put a J-Stars aircraft this valuable this close to a target region like this. This would be kind of dangerous. But you can see just how much data I can identify here. And again, if I couple this with a little bit more stuff, I'd have the ability to see even more. So as you can see, these technologies are fantastic. But what happens if we only have visual technology? Are we really in that bad of a game, kind of speak? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab one of my favorite examples of this. I'm going to run over to my carrier group here, and I'm going to grab myself an MQ-8B Fire Scout. Now, the reason I love this thing so much is because it's so cheesy. Not in a bad way. I mean, it's actually pretty cool. So I'm going to grab this helicopter. I'm going to move it to here, and I'm going to go dump my knowledge of all the targets here, just for safety here. And I'm going to order my little helicopter here to drop down to probably about, we'll do 4,000 feet here. Cruise is fine, and he is just a visual helicopter. Everything on this one is basically geared for that particular purpose. If I go up here to the MQ and kind of scroll down, you'll see here this maritime surveillance. It doesn't really have the most sophisticated sensors. Everything's IR, everything's laser rangefinder, everything's camera. Remember, it's kind of early in the morning too. So my longbow is just going off of what it can see. Remember, none of these other units have radars engaged right now. This is just pure visual reconnaissance. And notice what we can pick up. First of all, we get the carrier. Second of all, we get a couple of the air units, so we spotted that one kind of luckily, which was cool. And we also finally have identified the fact that there are other aircraft here that we can actually see the different components too. We identify them as MiG-29s and stuff like that. So I'm going to let my MQ-8 get a little bit closer here. And again, these are little tiny helicopters. These are, you look at the picture of this thing and you're like, seriously, you sent that thing all the way here? Yeah, we did. And you'll notice, of course, our aircraft, we can identify all these different components. And if we get a little bit closer, which is going to be really dangerous, there's actually a shoot me down zone in this place that I have not violated yet. I'm kind of proud of my handiwork here. You'll notice I got a little tiny bit closer. I'm finally able to identify this ground unit, which has been sitting here the whole time at the end of a pier, basically looking at us going, is he going to get closer? Is he going to get closer? And then unusually, which I find very interesting, is you can actually identify the types of submarines in a submarine pen. And these, of course, are Kilo submarines. So that is awesome. So I'm going to go ahead and send him back to base. And I'm going to pull out kind of the cheating that you can get. And that, of course, is an aircraft that combines visual sensors so you can identify individual components with a stupidly strong radar. And that is our friend, the F-35. I have no love for the F-35. I think it is a UFO as far as I'm concerned, technologically speaking. And there's a lot of cool things here. And obviously, other countries have fantastic tools for this too, especially once you start adding pods. So what I'm going to do is I'm working with my F-35 here. This is just the F-35, by the way. I'm not doing anything special. All my radars are kind of shut down. He's just kind of chilling, kind of getting set up for his little pass. And we're just going to make a high-speed pass through this region and basically collect as much intel as we possibly can. There we go. So I'm going to go ahead and drop his altitude to low altitude. I'm going to kick his speed up a little bit. Again, 740 is plenty. Go ahead and switch my sensors on. I'm going to go turn on the stupidly powerful radar on the front of this thing. And let's see what we can see. So again, we're just coming over the mountain now, but we've quickly spotted all these helicopters that are doing their thing. We spotted the tugboat. We've identified the carrier. We've not even spotted it. And we're also aware of all those like mooring buoys and stuff like that. And we can also identify the SAM, which remember how few people actually saw that SAM? SAMs are tough to see. And of course, this is the best part. Our little F-35 gets a little tiny bit closer, and it finally gets in range of some of its other tools on board, such as its, very, very sophisticated forward-looking infrared surveillance technology. And look what we can identify from this distance. I can tell you what ships are here. I can tell you who's parked at the airport. I can tell you what part of the airport they're parked at right now. I can identify the fact we've got all these mooring buoys. We can't identify what's on them for whatever reason, but that's okay. And we're just going to come ripping through here. Everybody's going to go ahead and take their little snap, taking a couple pictures there. We're going to lose the radar coverage in just a second there. You can see we're getting really close to the edge of that lobe, so we're going to lose most of these as we zip by. But remember, the visual sensors are still fantastic. So I make my pass there. And of course, like I said, these are all being detected by the basically the 360 awareness system on the F-35. It's really cool if you've never seen one. But as you can see, we have all the information we required all those other units to basically collect in order in one pass with one aircraft. Now, keep in mind, if we're equipped with some anti-ship missiles or something, we could have a real fun time with this party kind of a thing. And keep in mind, too, an F-35 is a stealthy aircraft, so it kind of gives you another advantage like that. So as you can see, this technology is interesting. Obviously, when it comes to surveillance, radar surveillance has the ability to look through clouds. If I did everything as visual surveillance today, I never would have been able to spot any of the targets. It'd just be completely invisible to me. The second thing we saw was with the radar surveillance. With the older generations of radars, they're basically going to let you know something is there. Slightly newer generations are going to let you know specifically where something is and generally roughly what type is. And of course, the latest and greatest radars, which we demonstrated a little later on, can actually identify the presence of specific units that are parked at airfields and on carriers. When you do just visual reconnaissance, you have some nice advantages. The biggest one being you just get much, much better classification of your targets, but it is very, very challenging to spot targets visually unless you're basically right on top of them. So the best combination, of course, of any of these things, as you could probably imagine, is sensor fusion. You want to have aircraft that basically have the ability to see the target initially on radar so that they can cue their regular visual sensors to actually spot, identify, and then later, of course, engage. Enjoy.